A baby girl disappeared from her hospital room, and 20 years later, a stranger knocks on their door, claiming she is the missing girl. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Emily Thompson spent another birthday staring at the untouched slice of cake in front of a photo of a baby who never grew up in her house when the doorbell rang. 20 years of worn-down hope hadn't prepared her for this moment. Her fingers trembled as she set down the small silver fork she'd been holding for several minutes without using. The doorbell chimed again, more insistent this time. Emily glanced at her watch. 7:43 p.m. Michael was upstairs working, and Amanda was supposed to be studying for her midterms. No one ever visited on April 9th. Their friends and extended family had learned long ago to give them space on this day. Emily smoothed her cardigan and tucked a strand of graying hair behind her ear before opening the front door. A young woman with pale skin and long brown hair stood on the porch, visibly shaking despite the mild spring evening. In her hands, she clutched a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Can I help you?" Emily asked, her voice catching slightly. The young woman swallowed hard. "My name is Jessica Miller," she said with a trembling voice, "but I think you know me as Lily." Emily's world tilted. She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles whitening. The name, Lily, hung in the air between them like a physical presence. For 20 years, that name had only been spoken in whispers in their home, a prayer never answered, a wound never healed. "Emily, who's at the door?" Michael's voice called from inside, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps descending the stairs. Jessica, Lily, shifted nervously. "I'm sorry to come like this, especially today. I know what day it is." Michael appeared behind Emily, his tall frame tensing as he took in the scene. "What's going on?" His protective hand came to rest on Emily's shoulder. "She says..." Emily couldn't finish the sentence, her throat closing around the impossible words. From the top of the stairs, Amanda watched, her 17-year-old face a mixture of confusion and wariness. "I know this is shocking," Jessica continued, her voice steadying slightly. "I only found out myself recently." She carefully unfolded something she'd been carrying, a small, faded pink blanket with an embroidered L in the corner. Emily's breath caught. That blanket had disappeared along with their 6-day-old daughter from the hospital nursery 20 years ago today. They had a matching one at home, preserved in a cedar chest, along with other items from a life cut tragically short. "Where did you get that?" Michael demanded, his voice sharpening with suspicion and nascent hope. "It was always mine. Helen, the woman who raised me, she kept it all these years." Jessica held the blanket out, her hands still trembling. "She told me everything 3 weeks ago. She's dying of cancer." Emily reached out with unsteady fingers touching the soft fabric. Immediately, flashes of memory assaulted her. The hospital nursery, with its pastel walls, the sudden blaring of alarms, security guards running, the devastating emptiness of the crib where her newborn daughter had been sleeping just moments before. "Please," Jessica said softly, "can I come in? There's so much to explain." Michael hesitated, his body still blocking the doorway protectively, but Emily nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "come in." In the living room, the tension was palpable. Jessica perched on the edge of the sofa, the blanket now on her lap. Emily sat directly across from her, unable to look away from the young woman's face, searching for herself in those features. Michael remained standing, arms crossed, while Amanda hovered in the doorway, watching with guarded eyes. "Helen Miller," Jessica began, "the woman who raised me as her only child, is dying of terminal cancer at Mercy Hospital. 3 weeks ago, when the doctors told her she only had months left, she confessed everything." Jessica's voice caught. "She told me I wasn't her biological daughter, that she took me from a hospital nursery 20 years ago." "And you believed her?" Michael asked sharply, looking for inconsistencies, for the trap he feared this might be. I didn't want to, Jessica admitted, but she had kept newspaper clippings, this blanket, even the clothes I was wearing that day. She swallowed hard. And I've always known that something wasn't right. Helen never had any photos of her pregnancy. No birth story. No other family who remembered me as a baby. Amanda whispered something to her father. Emily caught the words money and scam. Jessica heard it too. I'm not here for money, she said firmly. I have a life. I'm in college. I have a job. I'm here because... She paused, struggling to articulate the enormity of her reasons. Because I thought you deserved to know I'm alive, and because I needed to know where I came from. Emily suddenly stood up. I need to call Detective Ramirez. 20 minutes later, Detective Ramirez arrived, the same man who had been assigned to Lily's kidnapping case 2 decades ago and had never fully let it go. Gray now dominated his once black hair, but his eyes were as sharp as ever as he questioned Jessica. You said your mother, Helen Miller, kept a record of the kidnapping. Jessica nodded. A diary. She showed it to me before she became too ill to communicate clearly. Did she mention any accomplices? Anyone who helped her? Not that she told me, but the diary might. Ramirez made notes. And you said she worked at a different hospital at the time? Not where Lily was born? Yes, she was a pediatric nurse at St. Vincent's. She transferred to Mercy a year after she took me. Ramirez nodded, giving Michael a significant look. These were details that had never been released to the public. The kidnapper's likely medical background, the timing of a suspicious transfer at another local hospital. I brought these too, Jessica said quietly, pulling several photographs from her bag. My childhood, if it helps you believe me. Emily took the photos with shaking hands. Birthday parties, school events, holidays. Normal moments from a childhood that should have been theirs to witness. In each image, a smiling girl with familiar eyes grew older, alongside a middle-aged woman with kind features and graying blonde hair. Emily stared at the woman, Helen, the person who had stolen their child and their future. Your eyes, Emily said softly. They're the same shape as mine. Jessica nodded. Helen said that too. She said it was what made her most afraid someone would notice. Michael had been pacing the room but stopped now. What do we do next, Detective? DNA test immediately. I can arrange for an emergency processing. Results could be back in 24 hours. I brought a toothbrush, Jessica offered, and I'm willing to do whatever tests you need. Emily couldn't take her eyes off the young woman. If this was truly Lily, the thought was too overwhelming to complete. Where are you staying? Emily asked suddenly. I have a room at the Comfort Inn near the hospital. I'm visiting Helen daily while she's still... Jessica didn't finish the sentence. The detective collected samples from both Jessica and the Thompsons, promising to expedite the results. As he was preparing to leave, Jessica stood as well. I should go too. This has been a lot for everyone. She hesitated by the door. I'll leave my number. If you want to talk or have more questions. Emily nodded, unable to form words. The possibility that their daughter was standing before them, alive and whole after 20 years of grief, was too immense to process. As Jessica turned to leave, she paused, turning back. There's something else you should know, she said, her voice dropping. Helen didn't just confess, she showed me the diary, where she detailed planning the kidnapping. The room went still. What kind of planning? Michael asked, his voice tight. Jessica looked down at her hands. She wrote about other babies she considered before, but she chose Lily because she said, when she looked into her eyes in the nursery, she felt she was the daughter she should have had. A cold silence filled the room as the implications of Jessica's words sank in. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or a momentary lapse in judgment. Helen Miller had stalked multiple babies, selected their daughter specifically, and planned her abduction with calculation and purpose. Emily felt a wave of nausea, imagining a stranger watching their newborn, choosing her, planning to take her. The violation was almost worse now than it had been 20 years ago, made newly immediate by the presence of the grown woman who might be their stolen child. Detective Ramirez placed a steady hand on Emily's shoulder. "We'll have answers soon," he said quietly. "Try to rest tonight if you can." After they left, Michael, Emily, and Amanda stood in the entryway, the house feeling both emptier and more crowded than it had in years. "What if it's true?" Amanda finally asked, breaking the silence. "What if she's really Lily?" Emily looked toward the living room, where the birthday cake still sat untouched beside the photograph. For 20 years she had marked this day with rituals of remembrance. For 20 years she had wondered where her child was, if she was even alive. "If she's Lily," Emily whispered, "then everything changes." Michael wrapped his arms around both his wife and daughter, holding them close as the spring evening deepened outside their windows, and the possibility of a miracle, or a fresh heartbreak, hung in the balance. She wrote about other babies she considered before, but she chose Lily because she said, when she looked into her eyes in the nursery, she felt she was the daughter she should have had. Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, Helen's words echoing in her mind. She chose Lily. The idea that their daughter had been selected, as if from a catalog, made her stomach turn. She imagined Helen Miller prowling hospital corridors, peering into nurseries, assessing babies like items on display. What criteria had she used? What made Lily more desirable than the others? And most disturbingly, how close had other families come to experiencing the nightmare that had consumed the Thompsons for 20 years? Beside her, Michael tossed restlessly. She knew he wasn't sleeping either. "What are you thinking?" she whispered into the darkness. "That we shouldn't get our hopes up," he replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We don't know who she really is. But the blanket could have been acquired any number of ways," Michael said. "We need to be careful, Emily." She fell silent, knowing he was right to be cautious. Yet something in her recognized Jessica. Some maternal instinct that had lain dormant for 2 decades had stirred at the sight of the young woman on their doorstep. At 3:17 a.m., Emily heard Michael slip quietly from their bed. Through the crack in the bedroom door, she watched him head downstairs to his office. Unable to stay in bed alone with her thoughts, she followed him. She found him hunched over his computer, its blue light casting sharp shadows on his face. Around him, papers were already scattered across his desk. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. "Research," he replied without looking up. "I'm finding out everything I can about Jessica Miller and Helen Miller." On the screen, Emily glimpsed social media profiles, news articles, and what appeared to be public records. Michael was printing documents, arranging them in neat piles. According to her LinkedIn profile, Jessica is studying psychology at State. Has a part-time job at the campus bookstore. He shuffled through papers. Helen Miller worked as a pediatric nurse for 35 years. No criminal record. Husband died when Jessica was 4. Car accident. She seems to have given Jessica a normal life, Emily said, studying a printed photo of Jessica at what appeared to be a high school graduation, Helen's arm proudly around her shoulders. Michael's jaw tightened. If this is Lily, there was nothing normal about it. Emily touched his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Try to get some sleep. Detective Ramirez said the results could come as early as tomorrow afternoon. I need to know who we're dealing with," he insisted. "I won't let you get hurt again." Emily left him to his research, knowing nothing would dissuade him when he was in protective mode. As dawn broke, she found Amanda sitting alone in the backyard, a wooden box open on her lap. Inside were family photographs, holidays, birthdays, vacations, chronicles of their life after Lily. Emily noticed what she'd never seen before. In nearly every family photo, There was a subtle space, as if they'd unconsciously left room for the missing child. "Do you think it's really her?" Amanda asked without looking up. Emily sat beside her daughter. "I don't know. Dad thinks it's a scam." "Your father is being cautious," Emily corrected gently. "It's his way of protecting us." Amanda pulled out a photo of herself at 5 years old, sitting on Santa's lap. "If it is her, what happens to us, to me?" Emily heard the real question beneath Amanda's words. She wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Nothing changes about how much we love you. Nothing ever could. But everything else changes," Amanda said quietly. "Our whole family story." Emily couldn't deny it. If Jessica was truly Lily, their family narrative would be fundamentally altered. The daughter they had mourned was alive. The closure they thought they'd found was false. And Amanda, born 4 years after the kidnapping, partly in an attempt to heal their broken family, would have to share her parents with a sister she'd never known. "We'll face it together," Emily promised, though she had no idea how. Across town, Jessica sat beside Helen's hospital bed. The machines beeped rhythmically, marking the slow fade of the only mother she had ever known. Helen looked smaller than Jessica had ever seen her, shrunken against the white sheets, tubes snaking from her arms and nose. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Jessica asked, though Helen, heavily sedated, couldn't answer. "Why wait until you were dying?" She thought of the Thompsons, the shock and hope and suspicion on their faces, the way Emily had reached for the blanket with trembling hands, the father's protective stance, the half-sister watching warily from the stairs. "They seem like good people," Jessica whispered to Helen. "The kind of family you always said I came from." Helen's eyes fluttered open, surprising Jessica, who had thought she was deeply unconscious. "Jessica!" Her voice was barely audible. "I'm here," Jessica said, leaning closer. "Did you find them?" Helen's fingers twitched, seeking Jessica's hand. "Yes," Jessica replied, taking Helen's cool, dry hand in hers. "I found them." "Are they kind to you?" Each word seemed to cost Helen tremendous effort. Jessica hesitated. "They're in shock. They need time." "I'm sorry," Helen whispered. "I was so afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That if you knew who you really were, I'd lose the only person I've ever loved." Jessica felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Why did you take me? Really?" But Helen's eyes had closed again, her momentary lucidity fading. Jessica sat back in her chair, caught between two lives, the one she had lived and the one that had been taken from her. A nurse entered the room. "Her vitals are weaker today," she said gently. "The doctor wants to talk to you about comfort care options." Jessica nodded numbly. She'd been preparing for Helen's death for weeks. Now she had to prepare for what came after, a life with a new identity, a new family, a new understanding of herself. Back at the Thompson house, Emily was obsessively organizing Lily's room. For 20 years it had remained largely unchanged, a shrine to their missing child. The crib had been replaced with a twin bed when Lily would have outgrown it, but otherwise the pale yellow walls, the butterfly mobile, the stuffed animals arranged on shelves remained as they had been. Emily found herself changing the sheets, dusting surfaces that had been dusted 100 times before, adjusting the angle of picture frames. She wasn't sure what she was preparing for. The chance that Lily might actually come home? Or the disappointment if the DNA test proved negative? The doorbell rang at 3:45 p.m. Detective Ramirez stood on the porch holding an official envelope. "The results," he said simply. Michael called for Amanda, and the family gathered in the living room, all standing as if seated would somehow diminish the gravity of the moment. Ramirez opened the envelope and removed a single sheet of paper. "The test confirms with 99.9% certainty that Jessica Miller is biologically Lily Thompson." Emily's legs gave way, and she sank onto the sofa, her entire body trembling. 20 years of grief and hope and uncertainty crystallized into a single, undeniable fact. Their daughter was alive. Michael stared out the window, his face unreadable, his hands clenched at his sides. Amanda stood frozen for a moment before turning and running from the room, the slam of her bedroom door echoing through the house. "What happens now?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. "That's up to you," Ramirez said gently. "Legally, Jessica is an adult. She can make her own choices about contact and relationships." "And Helen Miller?" Michael asked, still facing the window. "What happens to her?" "Given her medical condition, prosecution is unlikely, but we'll be taking her full statement and investigating if she had any accomplices." Emily's mind was spinning. Her daughter was alive. The infant she had grieved for 20 years was a living, breathing young woman who had been raised by the very person who had caused their family's greatest pain. "I should call Jessica," she said, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. As Emily dialed, the detective and Michael stepped into the kitchen to discuss the legal ramifications. Jessica answered on the second ring. "The results are positive," Emily said without preamble. "You're Lily." There was silence on the other end, then a soft intake of breath. "I already knew," Jessica said quietly, "but having it confirmed. Would you come over? We have so much to talk about, so much time to make up for." "I will," Jessica promised. "But first, I need to process this, and I need to tell Helen." Emily felt a jolt of anger at the mention of Helen's name. "Of course," she managed to say, though the words tasted bitter. When she hung up, Emily found herself staring at the family photos on the wall. In each one, there was Lily's absence, an invisible hole in their family portrait. Now that hole could be filled, but nothing would be the same. Michael returned to the living room after seeing Detective Ramirez out. "She wants to tell Helen first," Emily said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Michael's face hardened. "Helen, the woman who stole our daughter and let us think she was dead for 20 years. She raised her, Michael. For better or worse, she's the only mother Jessica has ever known." "Jessica," Michael repeated, "not Lily, a stranger with our daughter's DNA." Emily was about to respond when the house phone rang. Michael answered, his expression shifting from anger to concern. "It's the hospital," he said, covering the receiver. "Helen Miller's condition has deteriorated suddenly. They're asking for Jessica to come immediately." Emily took the phone. "This is Emily Thompson. Jessica is on her way to you, but please tell her we'll come too." After hanging up, she met Michael's questioning gaze. "I need to be there," she said, simply. "Why?" "After what that woman did?" "Because our daughter needs us," Emily replied, "and because I need to see Helen Miller with my own eyes." They were gathering their things when Amanda appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "I'm coming too," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. As they drove to the hospital, Emily thought about the two women waiting there, the daughter she had lost and the woman who had taken her. One woman she needed to reclaim, the other she needed to face. She wasn't sure which prospect terrified her more. The hospital corridors seemed endless as they followed the directions to Helen's room. When they reached the doorway, Emily stopped, frozen at the sight that greeted her. Jessica sitting beside the bed of a frail, elderly woman attached to numerous machines. Here was the physical reality of the woman who had destroyed their lives. Not a monster, but a dying old woman. And beside her, their daughter holding her hand. "I need to go to her," Emily whispered to Michael. "Even being who she is, she's dying alone." Jessica bolted through the hospital parking lot, her heart hammering against her ribs. The call had been urgent. Helen's condition had deteriorated rapidly. She barely registered the sound of another car pulling in behind her, the doors opening and closing as she pushed through the hospital's main entrance. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights made her squint as she rushed toward the elevator bank. She jabbed the button repeatedly, as if that might make it arrive faster. When she heard her name called, she turned to see Emily Thompson approaching, with Michael and Amanda following a few steps behind. "You came," Jessica said, surprise momentarily overriding her panic. Emily nodded, slightly out of breath. "I thought you might need someone." The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and they all stepped inside. The ride to the 5th floor passed in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When the doors opened, Jessica led the way to Helen's room, her footsteps quickening as she approached. The scene that greeted them was alarming. Helen lay unnaturally still, her skin ashen against the white hospital sheets. The various monitors surrounding her bed beeped with increased urgency, their erratic rhythms matching Jessica's racing pulse. "What happened?" Jessica asked the nurse who was adjusting one of the IV drips. "Her blood pressure dropped suddenly," the nurse explained. "The doctor has been paged." Jessica moved to Helen's bedside, taking her limp hand between her own. Behind her, she was acutely aware of the Thompson family lingering in the doorway, witnessing this intimate moment with the woman who had stolen their child. Emily stood frozen at the threshold, finally seeing face to face the woman who had destroyed her family 20 years ago. Helen Miller was not the monster of her nightmares, but a frail, elderly woman, her body ravaged by cancer and time. The reality was somehow both more mundane and more devastating than the villain Emily had constructed in her mind. A nurse approached Emily, mistaking her for a relative. "Are you family as well?" she asked kindly. "I have some of her personal belongings that were stored in the secure cabinet. Would you like them?" Before Emily could correct the misunderstanding, the nurse handed her a worn leather handbag. "There are some important papers and journals in there. You might want to keep them safe." Emily held the bag awkwardly, feeling the weight of Helen's possessions in her hands. She looked up to see Jessica watching her, their eyes meeting over Helen's unconscious form. After a moment of hesitation, Jessica nodded slightly. "You can come in," she said quietly. Emily moved into the room slowly, as if approaching a precipice. She sat in the chair on the opposite side of Helen's bed, the handbag resting in her lap. Michael remained by the door, his posture rigid with suppressed emotion, while Amanda hovered, uncertainly in the space between. "She doesn't look how I imagined," Emily said softly, studying Helen's face, the lines of age, the hollow cheeks, the thin, colorless lips. "What did you imagine?" Jessica asked. Emily shook her head. "I don't know. Someone harder." Jessica looked down at Helen's hand in hers. She wasn't hard. She was kind, patient. She came to every school play, every parent-teacher conference. Her voice caught. She was a good mother. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with impossible contradictions. How could the woman who had committed such a terrible crime also be a loving mother? How could Jessica mourn the potential loss of someone the Thompsons had every reason to hate? Emily unclasped the handbag, needing something to occupy her hands. Inside, she found 2 worn notebooks. She removed them carefully, sensing their significance. "What are these?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Jessica glanced at the notebooks. Her diaries, the one with the blue cover. She trailed off, then continued with evident difficulty. "That's where she wrote about taking me." With trembling fingers, Emily opened the blue notebook to a random page. Helen's handwriting was precise and neat, the words meticulously documenting her obsession. "The nursery has a shift change at 2:15 a.m. There's a 7-minute window when the night nurse leaves and the early morning nurse hasn't yet arrived. The security guard patrols the maternity floor every 45 minutes, but his pattern is predictable. He never varies his route." Emily closed the book abruptly, feeling sick. The methodical planning revealed a level of premeditation that was chilling. This wasn't an impulsive crime of opportunity. It was calculated, researched, executed with precision. In the corridor, Michael was speaking with Detective Ramirez, who had arrived after receiving an update about Helen's condition. Amanda had wandered to the end of the hall, staring out a window at the city lights beginning to flicker on as dusk descended. Jessica noticed them and excused herself momentarily, leaving Emily alone with the unconscious Helen and the damning diaries. In the strange silence, Emily found herself speaking to the woman who had stolen her child. "I used to dream about finding you," she said quietly. "About what I would say, what I would do. And now you're here, and I can't even hate you properly because you're dying, and because you gave her a life that seems to have been," she struggled to find the right word, "happy." Helen, of course, didn't respond. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only reply. Emily turned to the second notebook, thicker and more worn than the first. Opening it, she was confronted not with details of the kidnapping, but with a careful chronicle of Lily's life. The first entry was dated just days after the abduction. She smiled today, a real smile, not just gas. "I know I should feel guilty for the joy this brings me, but I can't. When she looks at me, I feel like I've finally found my purpose." The pages that followed documented first steps, first words, childhood illnesses, school achievements, pressed flowers from a mother-daughter picnic, a crayon drawing labeled "Me and Mommy" in a child's uneven script, a lock of brown hair taped to a page with the notation, "First haircut, age 3. Emily's vision blurred with tears. These were the moments she had lost, the milestones she should have witnessed, the memories that should have been hers. And yet, Helen had recorded them with such loving detail, almost as if, "It's like she was keeping them for you." Emily looked up to find Jessica standing in the doorway again, watching her read. "There's a letter," Jessica said, moving back to Helen's bedside, "near the middle. She wrote it to you years ago but never sent it." Emily turned pages until she found an envelope tucked between them, addressed simply to the Thompson family. With unsteady hands, she opened it and unfolded the letter inside. "If you are reading this, you have found your daughter. I know no apology can erase what I've done. I took her in a moment of desperate madness after losing my 6th pregnancy in 3 years. The doctors had told me I would never carry a child to term, and something in me broke. When I saw her in the nursery, so perfect, so beautiful, I convinced myself she was meant to be mine. I have thought about returning her 1,000 times. When she was 3, I drove to your neighborhood and watched your house from my car. When she was 5, I looked up your phone number and dialed it, only to hang up when you answered. The truth is, I was too selfish to give her back and too much of a coward to face the consequences of what I'd done. She has been loved every day of her life. I hope that brings you some small comfort, though I know it cannot possibly compensate for what I stole from you. She is bright, compassionate, and strong, everything a parent could hope for in a daughter. I am sorry. Those words are wholly inadequate, but they are true." Emily folded the letter carefully, her hands shaking. The sincere remorse it contained didn't erase the magnitude of Helen's crime, but it complicated the straightforward hatred Emily had nursed for 2 decades. In the hallway, Amanda had approached Jessica, both young women standing awkwardly before each other. "What was it like?" Amanda asked suddenly. "Growing up as her?" Jessica considered the question. "Normal, I guess. Until it wasn't. I never knew I was missing anything. And now? Now I feel like I'm living in 2 parallel universes. In one, I'm Jessica Miller, Helen's daughter. In the other, I'm Lily Thompson, the girl who disappeared." Amanda nodded slowly. "I've always been the daughter after the tragedy, the one they had to try to heal the hole you left." She immediately looked horrified at her own words. "I'm sorry that came out wrong." "No, it's okay," Jessica assured. "Her. I understand." Their conversation was interrupted by a flurry of activity as a doctor and several nurses rushed into Helen's room. Emily stepped back as they surrounded the bed, checking vital signs and adjusting equipment. "Her blood pressure is stabilizing," the doctor announced after several tense minutes. "But she's slipping deeper into unconsciousness. At this stage, it's unlikely she'll regain full awareness before—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Jessica sank into a chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Emily, acting on instinct, moved to sit beside her, hesitantly placing a hand on her arm. "What happens now?" Jessica asked, her voice small. Before Emily could respond, Michael stepped into the room, his expression grave. "I just spoke with Detective Ramirez," he said. "Sarah is being brought in for questioning based on information from Helen's diaries. It seems she may have been involved." "Sarah?" Emily repeated, confused. "My Sarah? My friend?" Michael nodded grimly. "There are entries in the diary referring to someone with inside knowledge of the hospital, someone with access to the nursery schedules. Ramirez thinks it was Sarah." The revelation hit Emily like a physical blow. Sarah had been her closest friend at the time of Lily's abduction. She had worked at the hospital as an administrative assistant. She had been the one to console Emily in those first devastating days, the one who brought meals and sat with her through endless nights of grief. "That's not possible," Emily whispered, though even as she spoke, pieces began to click into place. Sarah's unusual interest in the investigation over the years, her insistence on commemorating Lily's birthday each year, her constant presence in their lives after the tragedy. The monitors attached to Helen suddenly began to emit a series of high-pitched alarms. The doctor rushed back in, calling for a crash cart. Jessica stood frozen, watching as they began. Emergency procedures. "She's coding," a nurse announced. "Blood pressure dropping rapidly." In the midst of the chaos, Emily noticed something fall from Helen's hand onto the floor, a small key that must have been clutched in her palm. She picked it up without thinking, slipping it into her pocket as the medical team continued their desperate efforts. After several minutes, the doctor stepped back. "She's stabilized, but just barely. She's fallen into a deep coma and is showing minimal brain activity. I'm sorry, but at this point, we're looking at hours, maybe a day at most." Jessica nodded numbly, tears streaming down her face. The doctor left them with instructions to call the nurses' station immediately if there was any change. In the somber quiet that followed, Emily found herself examining the key she had picked up. It was small and old-fashioned, possibly for a safe deposit box or storage locker. "Do you know what this might open?" she asked Jessica, showing her the key. Jessica stared at it, recognition dawning. "It's for her safety deposit box at First National. She mentioned there were things in there, for me. Documents, I think." Michael, who had been speaking with Ramirez again in the hallway, returned with a troubled expression. "Ramirez wants to take us to question Sarah," he said. "They're holding her at the station now." Emily stood shakily, caught between the dying woman who had stolen their daughter and the friend who might have helped her do it. She looked at Jessica, torn between her newly discovered daughter and the immediate crisis. "Go," Jessica said quietly. "I'll stay with her. She doesn't have much time left." Emily hesitated, then embraced Jessica briefly. "We'll be back as soon as we can." As they prepared to leave, Jessica called after them. "There's something else you should know. In her more lucid moments yesterday, Helen mentioned someone else. She said she couldn't have done it alone, that she had help planning everything. She mentioned Sarah, but also someone closer to you." Emily walked unsteadily out of the hospital room, her world crumbling for the second time as she realized that, if Helen was telling the truth, the betrayal hadn't come only from a stranger, but also from Sarah, the friend who had consoled her for years, who had held her hand through missed birthdays, and who still was part of their lives. Emily staggered back from Helen's bedside, the silent words still echoing in her mind. "You finally came for her." The machine surrounding Helen's bed blared with urgent alarms as medical staff rushed into the room, pushing past the Thompson family. BP dropping to 70/40, a nurse called out. Heart rate irregular. Get the crash cart, the doctor ordered, already beginning chest compressions. Everyone out, please. Amanda pulled Jessica into the hallway while the medical team worked. Emily followed in a daze, Michael's steadying hand on her elbow. Through the glass window, they watched the frantic efforts to stabilize Helen. How does it feel? Amanda asked Jessica abruptly, her voice unnaturally steady. Being kidnapped and not knowing. Jessica blinked, momentarily startled by the directness of the question. She studied Amanda's face, the younger sister she never knew she had, and saw not just hostility there, but genuine bewilderment. I don't know how to answer that, Jessica admitted. It's like learning your entire life was built on quicksand. Everything I thought I knew about myself isn't true. Amanda's expression softened slightly. I've spent my whole life wondering about you. Do you want to know what that's like? Jessica nodded, her throat tight. It's like growing up with a ghost, someone who was always there but never present. Every birthday, every Christmas, there was this space, this silence that we all felt but couldn't fill. Amanda's voice cracked slightly. How is it possible to miss someone you never met? I think I understand that better than you might expect, Jessica replied quietly. I've always felt like something was missing, even before I knew what it was. Heavy footsteps interrupted their conversation as Michael strode toward them from the elevator bank, his face a thundercloud. He'd stepped away to make a call, and whatever he'd learned had clearly upset him further. What are you doing here? He demanded of Emily, his voice tight with controlled anger. Standing vigil for the woman who destroyed our lives? Emily flinched at his tone. Michael, please. No, he interrupted. Do you realize what you're doing? She's not some poor, sick woman deserving of your compassion. She's a criminal, a kidnapper who let us believe our daughter was dead for 20 years. His voice had risen enough that a nurse at the nearby station glanced up with concern. Emily placed a calming hand on his arm, which he immediately shrugged off. I needed to see her face, Emily said quietly, but firmly. I needed to understand. Understand what? How she justified stealing our baby. How she could sleep at night knowing what she'd done to us. Michael's voice broke slightly on the last words, raw emotion bleeding through his anger. Jessica stood frozen, caught between defending the only mother she'd ever known and acknowledging the terrible pain that woman had caused. Dad, Amanda interjected softly, using the childhood name she'd largely abandoned in recent years. This isn't helping. Michael ran a hand through his graying hair, struggling visibly for control. Detective Ramirez is downstairs. Sarah is being brought in for questioning based on what they found in Helen's diaries. He wants us there. The doctor emerged from Helen's room, his expression grave. We've stabilized her for now, but she's fallen into a deep coma. There's minimal brain activity. I'm afraid it's unlikely she'll regain consciousness before... He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. How long? Jessica asked, her voice small. Hours. Perhaps a day at most. The doctor's voice was gentle but clinical. I'm very sorry. Jessica nodded numbly, tears streaming silently down her face. Emily felt an instinctive urge to comfort her, this young woman who was her daughter by birth but a stranger by experience. She hesitated, uncertain if her touch would be welcome. Amanda surprised everyone by being the first to move, awkwardly placing an arm around Jessica's shoulders. I'm sorry, she whispered. Whatever she did, I know she's still your mom. The simple acknowledgement broke something in Jessica, and she buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Emily moved forward then, enveloping both young women in her arms, creating a circle of grief and tentative connection. Michael watched from a few steps away, his expression conflicted. After a moment, he cleared his throat. We should go meet Ramirez. Sarah's waiting. You go, Emily told him, still holding the girls. I'll stay here. Michael's jaw tightened. Emily. I'll come with you, Amanda offered unexpectedly, extracting herself from the embrace. Mom should stay with Jessica. Michael looked between them, clearly torn between his need to confront Sarah and his reluctance to leave Emily at Helen's bedside. Finally, he nodded curtly. Call me if anything changes, he said, the words directed at neither woman in particular, before turning to leave with Amanda. In the quiet that followed their departure, Emily and Jessica returned to Helen's room. The woman lay still and gray against the sheets, connected to a maze of tubes and wires, the only signs of life the shallow rise and fall of her chest and the steady beeping of monitors. She looks so small, Jessica whispered, taking her customary seat beside the bed and gently lifting Helen's limp hand. Emily sat opposite her, studying the unconscious woman intently. In repose, Helen's face seemed ordinary, neither monstrous nor saintly, just human. It was almost impossible to reconcile this frail figure with the calculating kidnapper who had destroyed their family. She was my whole world, Jessica continued softly. Growing up, it was just the two of us after my dad, after her husband died. She came to every school play, every soccer game. She made chicken soup when I was sick and threw me surprise parties for my birthday. Her voice caught. How do I reconcile that mother with what she did to you? Emily had no answer. How could either of them reconcile these two versions of Helen Miller, the loving mother and the child abductor? How could such profound love and such terrible cruelty exist in the same person? At the police station, Michael paced the small waiting room like a caged animal, while Amanda sat quietly, her fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on her knee. Through the window of an adjacent interview room, they could see Sarah seated at a table, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled, her face pale and drawn. Detective Ramirez joined them, a manila folder tucked under his arm. We've been questioning her for the past hour, he explained. Based on the entries in Helen Miller's diary and some other evidence we've uncovered, we believe Sarah provided insider information that made the kidnapping possible. I want to talk to her, Michael demanded. Ramirez hesitated. That's not standard procedure, Mr. Thompson. Nothing about this case is standard, Michael countered, his voice hard. 20 years, detective. 20 years of her pretending to grieve with us, of sitting at our table, of watching our daughter grow up while knowing exactly what happened to Lily. After a moment's consideration, Ramirez nodded. 5 minutes. I'll be watching through the glass. Michael entered the interview room, his tall frame rigid with tension. Sarah looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. Michael, she whispered, half rising from her chair. Don't, he said coldly, remaining standing rather than taking the seat across from her. Just tell me why. Sarah sank back down, her shoulders hunched. I never meant for it to happen. You have to believe me. What I believe, Michael said with barely controlled fury, is that you helped someone steal our daughter, then spent 20 years lying to our faces while we grieved. It wasn't like that, Sarah protested weakly. Helen was my friend from nursing school. She'd lost so many babies. When she saw Lily in the nursery, something in her snapped. She became obsessed. And you helped her? Sarah looked down at her hands. I told her about the security gaps, the shift changes. I didn't think she'd actually go through with it, and by the time I realized what she'd done, it was too late. Michael slammed his palm on the table, making Sarah jump. It was never too late. Every day for 20 years, you could have told us the truth. Every single day, you chose not to. I was afraid, Sarah whispered. Afraid of losing everything. My job, my freedom. Afraid of losing you and Emily as friends. Michael laughed bitterly. Friends? Is that what you think we were? while you were helping that woman raise our stolen child?" Outside in the waiting area, Amanda watched the confrontation through the glass, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had vague childhood memories of Sarah, birthday presents, holiday visits, the woman's bright laugh at family gatherings. All those memories were poisoned now. At the hospital, Jessica had dozed off, her head resting awkwardly against the side of Helen's bed, one hand still holding her mother's. Emily watched them both, her mind swirling with contradictory emotions. Hatred for what Helen had done warred with reluctant gratitude that she had at least loved Lily, Jessica, and given her a good life. Emily's phone vibrated with a text from Michael. Sarah confessed, coming back now. As she was reading the message, a young doctor entered the room carrying a tablet. "Ms. Miller," he said quietly, addressing Jessica, who stirred and blinked awake. "I need to discuss your mother's advance directives." Jessica straightened, immediately alert. "What about them?" "Given her current condition, we need to know your wishes regarding extraordinary measures. Your mother's paperwork indicates she didn't want to be kept alive by artificial means if there was no hope of recovery." Jessica's face crumpled. "You're saying it's time to let her go?" The doctor's expression was compassionate but direct. "Her organs are failing. Even with intervention, we're only prolonging the inevitable, perhaps by hours." Jessica looked across at Emily, her eyes pleading for what? Permission? Guidance? Understanding? Emily wasn't sure, but she found herself reaching across the bed to take Jessica's free hand. "Whatever you decide," she said softly, "I'll support you." Jessica closed her eyes briefly, tears spilling down her cheeks. When she opened them again, there was resignation in her gaze. "I'll sign the paperwork," she told the doctor. She wouldn't want to linger like this. After the doctor left with the signed forms, Jessica and Emily sat in silence, the only sounds the muted beeping of monitors and the hum of the oxygen machine. Between them lay Helen, unconscious and unaware of the momentous decisions being made around her. "Will they arrest her memory?" Jessica asked suddenly. "Will the official record show her as a criminal?" Emily considered the question carefully. "I don't know. That might depend partly on us, on whether we push for posthumous charges. What will you do?" Before Emily could answer, Michael and Amanda returned, their faces grim with fresh knowledge of betrayal. Michael's eyes darted to Helen's still form, then back to Emily. "The doctor was here," Emily explained quietly. "Jessica has signed the papers to remove life support. It's just a matter of time now." Michael nodded, his expression unreadable. "Sarah confessed everything. She helped plan the kidnapping, provided the security. Information, even created a distraction the night it happened." Emily felt physically ill at the confirmation of her friend's betrayal. Did she say why? She claims she didn't think Helen would go through with it, that by the time she realized what had happened, she was already complicit. Michael's voice was flat with disgust. She also said something else, something about Helen having another accomplice. "What?" Emily's head snapped up. "Who?" Michael's face darkened further. She wouldn't say. Claimed Helen had sworn her to secrecy, that this person had no idea what Helen was planning to do with the information they provided. Jessica looked between them, her expression stricken. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice barely audible. "Before she lost consciousness completely, Helen told me she'd left letters, evidence, names, everything documented in a safety deposit box." As though summoned by her words, Helen's heart monitor began to emit a different tone, not the urgent alarm of earlier, but a steady warning sound indicating further decline. A nurse entered to check the readings, adjusting the medication flowing through the IV. "It's beginning," she said gently to Jessica. "The medications are being tapered according to your instructions. It won't be long now." Jessica nodded, fresh tears spilling. The nurse left them alone again, and the room fell into a strange, suspended silence. 4 people watching a life slip away, each processing the moment through their own complicated lens of grief, anger, and uncertainty. While preparing for the funeral of the woman who had both destroyed and simultaneously preserved her family, Emily found in the back of her closet the black dress she had worn at what should have been Lily's symbolic funeral 15 years ago, a ceremony to help them move forward, which had clearly failed in its purpose. Emily stood in the corridor outside Helen's room, staring at her cell phone. The text message glowed on the screen. "Helen is awake and asking for you. Alone." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she considered what this might mean. "Are you going?" Jessica asked, appearing beside her, eyes red-rimmed from crying. "I don't know," Emily admitted. "I'm not sure I'm ready to hear whatever she wants to tell me." Jessica hesitated, then spoke softly. "She doesn't have many coherent moments left. If you want answers—" Emily knew Jessica was right. Whatever Helen Miller wanted to say, this might be the last chance to hear it. She nodded once, steeling herself as she moved toward the hospital room door. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Michael asked, his voice tight with concern. "I need to," Emily replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I've waited 20 years for answers." The room was dimly lit when Emily entered, the machines casting an eerie blue glow over Helen's gaunt face. Despite the doctor's prediction, Helen's eyes were open, though clouded with pain and medication. She turned her head slightly as Emily approached, recognition flickering across her features. "You shouldn't be here," Helen whispered, her voice barely audible. "Listening to the confessions of a woman at death's door, but you deserve to know everything." Emily sat rigidly in the chair beside the bed, unable to speak, only able to nod for Helen to continue. Part of her wanted to scream, to rage, to demand explanations for 20 years of agony. But another part, the part that had glimpsed Jessica's childhood photos, that had read Helen's diaries, needed to understand the human being behind the monstrous act. "I watched the hospital for months," Helen began, each word a struggle. "Learning routines, security protocols. I studied the nursery floor plan, memorized staff rotations." Her breathing was shallow, labored. "I knew exactly when the fewest people would be around." Emily's hands gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles white. The methodical planning made the crime seem even more heinous. Not a momentary lapse, but a calculated abduction. "I didn't act alone," Helen continued, her gaze holding Emily's. "Someone who knew your family helped me." The words struck Emily like a physical blow. "What do you mean? Who?" Helen's eyes drifted closed momentarily, and Emily feared she had slipped away again. But then they reopened, focusing with surprising clarity. "I met someone at a support group," Helen explained, "for women who couldn't carry to term. We became friends. She worked at the hospital." "Sarah," Emily whispered, the betrayal still fresh and raw. Helen nodded slightly. "She told me about security gaps, but she wasn't the only one." In the corridor outside, Jessica was going through Helen's belongings, a worn leather purse that the nurses had given her. Her hands trembled as she sorted through the mundane items: lipstick, reading glasses, a small address book. In a hidden compartment in the lining, her fingers found something unexpected, a thick envelope with yellowed edges. Jessica withdrew it carefully. It was addressed simply, "Thompson Family." Inside were several letters, each dated years apart, none bearing postage stamps. Letters written but never sent. Michael approached as she was examining them. "What's that?" "Letters," Jessica replied, holding them out. "From Helen to your family. She never mailed them." Michael took them, his expression hardening as he scanned the first one, dated 15 years ago. "I watch your house sometimes," he read aloud, his voice tight. "I park across the street and sit there, telling myself today will be the day I bring her back, but I never do. I tell myself she's happy, that it would traumatize her to be suddenly given to strangers. But these are lies I tell to keep her with me. Jessica covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. She considered returning me? Michael nodded grimly, shuffling to another letter. Lily, Jessica, started kindergarten today. I wonder if you've had another child by now, if there's a brother or sister who will never know their missing sibling. The guilt is a weight I carry every day, but not heavy enough to make me do the right thing. In Helen's room, Emily was struggling to process the new information. What do you mean, Sarah wasn't the only one? Who else knew? Helen's breathing had become more labored, each word clearly causing her pain. I needed to know which baby to take, needed to know your routines, when you'd be separated from her. Who? Emily demanded, leaning closer. Look for the connection, Helen whispered. Between Sarah and your family. Who introduced you? Emily's mind raced, trying to remember how Sarah had come into their lives. It had been so long ago. Michael's father, she realized suddenly. Robert Thompson introduced us at a hospital fundraiser. He said Sarah was new to the administrative staff. Helen nodded weakly. Robert knew about me, about my losses. The implication hit Emily like a tidal wave. Are you saying Michael's father helped you kidnap our daughter? Not directly, Helen struggled to explain. He didn't know what I intended, but he shared details. Your due date. Which room you'd be in. He thought he was just helping a fragile woman find purpose by connecting with a new mother. Emily felt dizzy, the room seeming to tilt around her. Robert Thompson had died 10 years ago, taking whatever secrets he held to his grave. The kind, gentle father-in-law who had doted on Amanda, who had grieved so deeply for Lily, had he unknowingly played a part in her abduction? Outside in the hallway, Amanda had joined Jessica and Michael, the three of them now huddled over the letters, reading Helen's years of guilt and justification spelled out in neat, careful handwriting. There's something else here, Jessica said, pulling out a small faded photograph from the bottom of the envelope. It showed a much younger Helen standing next to a man in a suit. That's Robert Thompson, isn't it? Michael took the photo, his expression darkening. My father? Why would she have a picture with my father? Amanda studied the image. They look like they knew each other well. This isn't just a casual meeting. In Helen's room, Emily was still reeling from the revelation. Why are you telling me this now? Why not take these secrets to your grave? Helen's eyes were glassy with unshed tears. Because Jessica deserves to know her whole story. And because... She paused, struggling for breath. Because I've carried this guilt for 20 years. I want to die with some small piece of redemption. Emily laughed bitterly. Redemption? You think a deathbed confession erases what you did to us? No, Helen whispered. Nothing erases it. But truth matters. Her hand moved weakly on the blanket, fingers searching for something. Emily realized she was trying to point to the small table beside the bed. There's a key, Helen said. Safety deposit box, First National Bank, box 247. Emily found the small brass key and held it up. What's in it? Everything, Helen breathed. The full diary, names, dates, proof of everyone involved. I documented it all. Why? Emily asked, genuinely bewildered. Why create evidence against yourself? Because I always knew this day would come, Helen replied, her voice fading. When Lily would learn the truth. When you would find us. I wanted her to have answers. The effort of speaking had clearly exhausted her. Helen's eyes drifted closed, her breathing becoming more shallow. For a moment, Emily thought she had lost consciousness again, but then Helen's lips moved, forming words almost too quiet to hear. When Jessica was 5, she whispered, I drove to your house, parked outside. She was asleep in the back seat. I was going to knock on your door, return her to you. Emily leaned closer, tears blurring her vision despite herself. Why didn't you? She woke up, Helen said, a faint smile touching her lips at the memory, said, Mommy, where are we? And I couldn't do it. Couldn't lose the only person who had ever loved me without conditions. The simple, selfish truth of it struck Emily with unexpected force. Not an elaborate justification or a twisted rationalization, just the raw desperation of a lonely woman who had found love, even if through terrible means. She was never mine to keep, Helen continued, each word weaker than the last. I always knew that. She was always yours. I just borrowed her for a while. In the doorway, Jessica stood frozen, having returned in time to hear Helen's confession. Her face was a mask of pain and conflicted love. Emily turned, seeing her daughter, for she truly was her daughter now, in heart as well as biology, and held out her hand in silent invitation. Jessica moved to the bedside, taking Helen's frail hand in hers, then reached for Emily's with her free hand. For a suspended moment, the three women formed a triangle of connection: birth mother, kidnapper, and the daughter caught between them. I forgive you, Jessica whispered to Helen, tears streaming down her face. Helen's eyes opened one last time, focusing first on Jessica, then shifting to Emily. I don't ask for your forgiveness, she said to Emily, just that you'll love her as much as I have. I already do, Emily replied truthfully. Helen's gaze moved back to Jessica. The box contains letters I wrote to you too, things I could never say out loud, about your birth parents, about why I chose you. Chose me? Jessica repeated, her voice breaking. You weren't the first baby I considered taking, Helen admitted, her voice now barely audible. There were others, but when I saw you in the nursery, your eyes, they looked directly into mine, as if you knew me already. A single tear escaped, rolling down her hollow cheek. In that moment, I convinced myself it was meant to be. Her eyes drifted closed again, her breathing growing more labored. The heart monitor beside the bed showed declining numbers, the beeps becoming more irregular. I should call the nurse, Jessica said, starting to rise. Helen's fingers twitched in a weak attempt to hold on. Not yet. There's one more thing you need to know. Her gaze shifted to Emily. Sarah was at the hospital that day, the day Lily was born. Emily went rigid. I know. She visited me. No, Helen whispered. She was there when it happened. When I took Lily, she saw me leaving with her. What are you saying? She helped create the distraction, pulled the fire alarm. She knew exactly what I was doing. Emily staggered out of the chair, her world crumbling for the second time as she realized that, if Helen was telling the truth, the betrayal hadn't come only from a stranger, but also from Sarah, the friend who had consoled her for years, who had held her hand through missed birthdays, and who still was part of their lives. Emily sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, staring at her phone. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled to Sarah's number, a contact she had called countless times over 20 years, for coffee dates, for comfort on difficult anniversaries, for the mundane exchanges of friendship that had sustained her through grief. Now each of those memories was tainted with suspicion. Had Sarah been watching her all this time, measuring her pain while knowing its source? She pressed the call button before she could lose her nerve. Emily, I was just thinking about you. Sarah's voice was warm and animated, as it had always been. How are you holding up with everything? This must be such a whirlwind. We need to talk, Emily cut her off, her voice controlled despite the storm of emotions inside her. In person. Now. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Of course, Sarah replied, her tone shifting from cheerful to concerned. Is everything okay? No, Emily said simply. Meet me at Riverside Cafe in 30 minutes. She hung up without waiting for a response, her heart hammering against her ribs. 20 years of friendship, of shared holidays and confidences and tears. Had it all been a carefully orchestrated performance? In the Thompson home, Jessica watched as Amanda methodically spread the contents of Helen's safety deposit box across the dining room table. There were photographs, letters, legal documents, and most disturbingly, a thick journal bound in red leather. "I can't believe we're doing this," Amanda said, carefully lifting a yellowed photograph that showed a much younger Helen standing beside Robert Thompson, Michael's father, at what appeared to be a hospital fundraiser. "Dad's going to lose it when he sees this." Jessica picked up the photo, studying the face of the grandfather she had never known. "They definitely knew each other," she observed. "Look at how comfortable they seem together." Amanda flipped through another stack of photographs. "Here's another one," she said, handing Jessica a picture of Helen, Sarah, and Robert, all smiling at a garden party. "And look at the date. This was taken just 3 months before you were born." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. The conspiracy that had shaped her entire existence seemed to grow more complex by the hour. "We need to find more concrete proof of Sarah's involvement before we show this to your dad." "Our dad," Amanda corrected her quietly, then looked surprised at her own words. Jessica glanced up, meeting her half-sister's eyes. For a moment, neither spoke, the simple correction hanging between them, a tentative bridge across 20 years of separation. The moment was broken by the sound of the front door opening as Michael returned from the police station, his face haggard with exhaustion. "Dad," Amanda called, quickly gathering the photographs. "We found something." Michael approached the table, his eyes widening as he saw the evidence spread before them. "Where did you get all this?" "Helen's safety deposit box," Jessica explained. "She gave Emily the key before she lost consciousness." Michael picked up the photograph of his father with Helen, his hand visibly shaking. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "My father had nothing to do with—" "There's more," Amanda interrupted gently, handing him another photograph, this one showing Robert, Helen, and Sarah together. Michael sank into a chair, the color draining from his face. "This can't be right. My father grieved for Lily. He was devastated by her disappearance." "Maybe he didn't know what Helen was planning," Jessica suggested. "Maybe he thought he was just helping a woman who had lost multiple pregnancies connect with new parents." Michael's jaw tightened. "Or maybe this is all an elaborate setup. We only have Helen's word that any of this means what it appears to mean." Amanda reached for the red leather journal. "There's this too," she said quietly. "Helen's diary from the time before the kidnapping." Before Michael could respond, his phone rang. It was Emily calling from the cafe. "Sarah's here," she said without preamble. "I'm about to confront her. I think you should come." At Riverside Cafe, Emily sat at a corner table watching as Sarah approached with an expectant smile that faltered when she saw Emily's expression. "Emily, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, sliding into the seat opposite her friend. Emily studied the woman she had trusted implicitly for 2 decades. The gentle curve of her cheek, the crow's feet around her kind eyes, the silver threading through her once auburn hair. How could this familiar face belong to someone capable of such devastating betrayal? "Helen Miller is dying," Emily said flatly. "Before she loses consciousness completely, she had quite a lot to say. About you." Sarah's smile vanished entirely, her face draining of color. "Emily, I don't know what she told you, but—" "Don't!" Emily cut her off sharply. "Don't lie to me anymore, Sarah. Not after 20 years. Sarah's eyes darted around the cafe as if seeking an escape route. "This isn't the place to discuss." "Did you help her take Lily?" Emily demanded, her voice low but intense. Sarah flinched as if she'd been struck. "Emily, please, it wasn't like that. You have to understand." The cafe door opened, and Michael entered with Amanda and Jessica following close behind. Sarah's eyes widened at the sight of Jessica, taking in the young woman who was unmistakably Emily's daughter. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's the spitting image of you at that age." Jessica approached the table slowly, Amanda at her side. In her hands, Jessica carried Helen's red journal, open to a specific page. "We found this," Jessica said, placing the journal on the table between Emily and Sarah. "Helen documented everything." Sarah stared at the open diary, her hands beginning to tremble visibly. The page detailed a meeting between Helen and Sarah 3 weeks before Lily's birth, including specifics about the maternity ward layout and security protocols that only an insider would know. "I never thought she would actually do it," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "You have to believe me." "Believe you?" Michael's voice was cold as he joined them, standing behind Emily's chair. After 20 years of deception, tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I met Helen at a support group for women with fertility issues. She'd had 6 miscarriages. She was broken, desperate. We became friends. I just wanted to help her." "By helping her steal our child?" Michael demanded, his voice rising enough that several cafe patrons turned to look. "No," Sarah protested. "I shared information about the hospital, yes, about security gaps, shift changes. But I thought she was just obsessed with babies. I never imagined she would actually take one." Jessica leaned forward. "But according to her diary, you were there that night." Sarah's face crumpled. "I was working the late shift. I saw her leaving the maternity ward with a bundle. By then it was too late. The alarm was already sounding. Security was running everywhere. And I froze." Emily felt physically ill hearing the confession. "And afterward, all these years, watching us grieve, holding my hand at memorial services, bringing casseroles on Lily's birthday. What was that, Sarah?" "That was real," Sarah insisted, tears now flowing freely. "I was consumed by guilt. I thought if I could at least help you through your grief." "Help us?" Michael interrupted incredulously. "You helped create our grief." "Why did you never come forward?" Amanda asked, speaking for the first time. "Even years later?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "At first I was terrified of being implicated. Then, as time passed, it seemed crueler to reveal the truth. What good would it do to tell you Lily was alive but unreachable? And then, it had been 5 years, 10 years. The lie was too big to take back." "And my grandfather?" Jessica asked quietly. "Robert Thompson? What was his role in all this?" Sarah glanced at Michael, then back at Jessica. "Robert met Helen through me. He knew about her struggles with pregnancy. He felt sorry for her and introduced her to several expectant mothers at the hospital, thinking it might help her heal. Emily was one of them. But he didn't know what she was planning," Sarah continued. "When Lily disappeared, he was genuinely devastated. He even suggested that Helen, with her nursing background, might be able to provide insights into the kidnapper's psychology." Michael ran a hand through his hair, his expression haunted. "So my father unwittingly introduced this woman to our family." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "He never knew the role he played." Emily's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, then looked up, her face pale. "It's the hospital. Helen's organs are failing rapidly. They don't think she'll make it through the night." The news created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Sarah looked at Jessica, genuine sympathy in her eyes despite everything. "I'm so sorry. Whatever she did, I know she was your mother for 20 years. Jessica nodded silently, tears filling her eyes. Detective Ramirez entered the cafe, his timing impeccable as always. He approached their table, nodding to the Thompsons before turning his attention to Sarah. "Ms. Williams, I need you to come with me to the station for formal questioning," he said firmly. Sarah stood shakily. "I'll tell you everything," she said, looking at Emily one last time. "I'm so sorry for everything." As Ramirez led Sarah away, Emily felt strangely hollow. The answers she had sought for 20 years were finally coming to light, but they brought no satisfaction, only new layers of pain and betrayal. "We should get back to the hospital," Jessica said quietly. "I want to be there at the end." Emily nodded, gathering her purse. As they prepared to leave, the cafe owner approached their table, an older woman who had known the Thompsons for years. "Emily, dear," she said kindly, "is everything all right?" That looked like quite an intense conversation. Emily managed a weak smile. "We're just dealing with some difficult family matters, Margaret." "Family is always complicated," Margaret replied sympathetically. "But it's worth fighting for." The simple wisdom of the statement hung in the air as they left the cafe. Family was indeed complicated, perhaps never more so than for the Thompsons, whose definition of family had been violently disrupted and was now being painfully reconstructed. As Sarah was being led away for interrogation, Emily realized something terrifying. The next big decision wasn't about justice or forgiveness, but about Helen, who had entered multiple organ failure and, according to the doctors, wouldn't make it through the night, taking with her to the grave all the truth that had not yet been revealed. The Thompson family arrived at the hospital in a strained silence. The elevator ride to Helen's floor felt interminable, each of them lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. When the doors finally opened, a doctor was waiting for them, his face grave. "Ms. Miller has entered the terminal phase," he explained quietly to Jessica. "Her blood pressure is critically low and multiple organs are shutting down. We've made her as comfortable as possible, but I must prepare you. It's only a matter of hours now." Jessica nodded numbly, her face pale. "Can I see her?" "Of course. We've moved her to a private room at the end of the hall." As Jessica started toward the room, Emily hesitated, unsure if she should follow. Her role here was ambiguous. She was neither family to Helen nor a detached observer. She was the mother of the child Helen had stolen, now returned to her through this bizarre twist of fate. "Come with me?" Jessica asked, turning back to Emily with vulnerable eyes. "Please?" Emily felt Michael tense beside her, but ignored it. "Of course," she said softly. The room was dim and quiet except for the subdued beeping of monitors. Helen lay motionless, her breathing shallow and labored. The vibrant, determined woman who had planned and executed a kidnapping 20 years ago, who had raised Jessica with evident love and care, had been reduced to this fragile shell. Jessica took the chair closest to the bed, reaching for Helen's limp hand. Emily stood awkwardly behind her, feeling like an intruder in this intimate moment. "I'm here, Mom," Jessica whispered, and Emily tried not to flinch at the word Mom applied to Helen. "I'm not leaving." In the corridor outside, Michael paced restlessly, while Amanda sat in one of the vinyl chairs, scrolling through her phone without really seeing it. "I can't believe we're here," Michael muttered, running a hand through his hair, "standing vigil for the woman who destroyed our lives." Amanda looked up at him. "She's dying, Dad. And whatever she did, Jessica loves her." "Jessica?" Michael repeated, the name still strange on his tongue. Not Lily, their stolen baby, but Jessica, a fully formed young woman with memories and attachments they had no part in creating. "She's our sister," Amanda said simply, "and she's losing the only mother she's ever known. We should try to be here for her." Michael stopped pacing, struck by the maturity in his younger daughter's voice. When had Amanda grown into this thoughtful young woman? Had he been too consumed by his grief over Lily to fully notice? Inside the room, Jessica had dozed off, her head resting awkwardly against the side of Helen's bed. Emily watched them both, this tableau of mother and daughter that simultaneously filled her with rage and pity. How could she reconcile her hatred for what Helen had done with the undeniable fact that the woman had, by all accounts, been a loving mother to Jessica? Emily found herself studying Helen's face, searching for signs of the monster she had imagined for 20 years. But all she saw was an elderly woman ravaged by disease, her features peaceful in unconsciousness. It was maddening how ordinary she looked, how human. The door opened softly, and Amanda entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the vending machine. She handed one to Emily, then stood beside her, both of them watching Jessica sleep. "It's weird, isn't it?" Amanda whispered, "that I've had a sister all this time and never knew it." Emily nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "I'm sorry, Amanda. I know this has been so much to process." "I'm okay," Amanda assured her. "It's just, I always wondered what it would be like to have a sister. I used to make up stories about Lily, about what we would do together if she was found. And now it's real and complicated, but I'm glad she's here." Jessica stirred, lifting her head groggily. When she saw Amanda, she attempted a small smile. Hey yourself," Amanda replied. "I brought coffee, but I didn't know how you take it." "Black is fine," Jessica said, accepting the cup with murmured thanks. "Has there been any change?" Emily shook her head. "The same." Jessica looked back at Helen, her expression conflicted. "I keep thinking about what she told you, about almost bringing me back when I was 5, about parking outside your house with me asleep in the car." "I've been thinking about that too," Emily admitted. "What would my life have been like if she had knocked on your door that day?" Jessica wondered aloud. "If she had returned me to you?" No one had an answer to that impossible question. The room fell silent again, save for the rhythmic sounds of the machines keeping Helen alive. The quiet was broken when Michael entered, followed by Detective Ramirez. "There are reporters downstairs," Michael said grimly. "Someone at the hospital must have leaked the story." Emily felt a surge of anxiety. After 20 years of managing their private grief, the idea of their story becoming public fodder was unbearable. "How many?" "Enough," Ramirez replied. "Local channels mostly, but a national crew is on the way." This kind of story, a kidnapped child reunited with her family after 2 decades, the kidnapper dying, it's going to attract attention. Jessica looked alarmed. "I don't want to talk to reporters, I can't." "You don't have to," Emily assured her quickly. "We can release a brief statement asking for privacy during this difficult time." "My office can coordinate that," Ramirez offered, "but you should prepare yourselves. This case is going to generate significant media interest." After Ramirez left to deal with the press, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. The outside world was intruding on their private reckoning, forcing them to consider how their personal tragedy would be perceived and consumed by strangers. "Do you think they'll want to interview us?" Amanda asked, looking worried. "Ask us how it feels to find out our sister was alive all this time?" "Probably," Michael said, his tone bitter. "People love these kinds of stories. They think they're heartwarming. The missing child found, the family reunited. They don't understand the damage that can never be undone." Jessica flinched at his words, and Emily shot him a warning look. Whatever his justified anger toward Helen, taking it out on Jessica was unfair. "I'm sorry," Michael said, noticing Jessica's reaction. "I didn't mean... It's not about you, it's about what was taken from all of us, including you." Jessica nodded, but her eyes remained downcast. The weight of everything, Helen's impending death, the public exposure of their story, the complex emotions swirling between all of them, seemed to press down on her shoulders. Emily moved to sit beside her, hesitantly placing a hand on her arm. "Whatever happens with the media, we'll face it together, as a family." The word family hung in the air, its meaning simultaneously obvious and entirely unclear. What kind of family were they? How could they build something new from the ashes of what Helen had destroyed? The evening progressed slowly, each hour marked by the gradual decline in Helen's vital signs. Nurses came and went, adjusting medications, checking monitors, offering quiet words of support to Jessica. Emily remained beside her daughter, while Michael and Amanda took turns getting food and coffee from the cafeteria. Around midnight, Jessica showed Emily photos on her phone, snapshots of her life with Helen, birthday parties with colorful balloons and homemade cakes, school plays with Jessica in costume, Helen beaming proudly from the audience, Christmas mornings, beach vacations, ordinary moments of a seemingly normal childhood. She made every birthday special, Jessica said softly, swiping through the images. She would wake me with pancakes shaped like whatever age I was turning. And she kept these scrapbooks, documenting everything. Emily finished for her, remembering the detailed journal she had found. I saw them. Jessica looked up, her expression pained. It's like she was keeping a record for you, of everything you missed. Emily swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. The thought was simultaneously touching and excruciating that Helen had preserved these moments, perhaps out of some twisted form of guilt or atonement. Near dawn, there was a subtle change in Helen's breathing. A longer pause between each inhalation, a faint rattle in her chest. The night nurse came in to check her vitals, then went to call the doctor. "It's getting close," she told Jessica gently. "Is there anyone else you'd like to call to be here?" Jessica shook her head. "It's just been the two of us for so long." She looked at the Thompsons. And now, them. The doctor arrived and confirmed what they already knew. Helen was actively dying, likely within the next hour. He adjusted her morphine drip to ensure she was comfortable, then left them to their vigil. Jessica turned to Emily, her eyes swimming with tears. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to say goodbye to her while knowing what she did to you. To all of you." Emily felt her own eyes fill with tears. The complexity of the moment was overwhelming. Watching her daughter grieve for the woman who had caused them all such profound suffering. Yet in this raw moment of human vulnerability, the rigid categories of victim and perpetrator seemed to blur at the edges. "You love her," Emily said simply. "Despite everything, she was your mother for 20 years. That love is real, and you're allowed to feel it." Jessica broke down then, sobbing into her hands. Emily hesitated only a moment before wrapping her arms around her daughter, holding her as she grieved. Over Jessica's head, she met Michael's gaze across the room. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions, but he nodded once, acknowledging the necessity of what she was doing. As the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, Helen's breathing changed again, becoming more sporadic. Jessica straightened, wiping her tears, and took Helen's hand once more. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. "You can go now. I'll be okay." At 5:42 a.m., Helen Miller took her final breath, slipping away quietly as Jessica held her hand. The monitor flatlined, its steady tone breaking the silence of the room. The doctor was called to pronounce death, and then they were left alone with the reality of what had happened. Helen was gone, taking with her any unspoken truths, any explanations or justifications that might have helped them make sense of the past 20 years. Jessica stood by the bed for a long time, saying her private goodbyes. The Thompson family waited respectfully, unsure of their place in this moment of closure. When Jessica finally turned to them, her face was tear-streaked but composed. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "There will be arrangements to make," Emily said. "For the funeral." Jessica nodded slowly. Would you come? To the funeral?" The question hung in the air, laden with significance. Would they honor the woman who had caused them such pain? Could they support Jessica in her grief without compromising their own sense of justice? It was Emily who answered, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Yes, we'll be there. She was your mother for 20 years. That can't be erased." As she prepared for the funeral of the woman who had both destroyed and simultaneously preserved her family, Emily found in the back of her closet the black dress she had worn at what should have been Lily's symbolic funeral 15 years ago, a ceremony to help them move forward, which had clearly failed in its purpose. Emily stared at the black dress in her hands, memories washing over her like a cold tide. 15 years ago, they had stood around an empty grave, burying mementos of a child they believed they would never see again. The funeral had been Michael's idea, a way to find closure, to move forward with their lives while honoring Lily's memory. Emily had gone through the motions, clutching Amanda's small hand as the tiny casket filled with baby clothes and photographs was lowered into the ground. But it had been a lie, an empty ritual. There had been no body, no true ending to their story, and now, as if in some surreal dream, she was preparing to attend the funeral of the woman who had been raising their daughter all those years. "Mom?" Amanda's voice pulled her from her reverie. She stood in the doorway of Emily's bedroom, already dressed in a simple black skirt and blouse. "Jessica just called. She's at her apartment and doesn't know what to wear. She asked if I could help." Emily nodded, carefully hanging the dress back in the closet. She would not wear it today. That dress belonged to another chapter of their story, one that was finally closing. "Go to her," she said. "She needs you right now." 30 minutes later, Amanda stood in Jessica's small apartment, surrounded by discarded clothing. Jessica sat on the edge of her bed, staring helplessly at the garments spread around her. "I don't know why this is so hard," Jessica said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It's just clothes." Amanda sat beside her, picking up a navy blue cardigan. "It's not just clothes," she said gently. "You're trying to figure out how to honor her, while also acknowledging the truth about who she was. That's impossible to express through an outfit." Jessica looked at her half-sister with surprise. "How did you get so wise?" "Psychology major," Amanda shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. "Plus, I've had a lot of practice overthinking things." She handed Jessica the cardigan. "This looks like something Helen would have liked. Simple, classic. Pair it with that black dress and you'll look lovely." Jessica accepted the cardigan, running her fingers over the soft wool. "Thank you. Not just for this, but for being here. You didn't have to come." "That's what sisters do," Amanda replied, the word sisters still new and strange on her tongue, but somehow right. The funeral was held in a modest chapel on the outskirts of town. As Michael had predicted, a small group of reporters had gathered outside, held at bay by a pair of police officers Ramirez had arranged to provide privacy. Inside, the attendance was sparse. A few of Helen's colleagues from the hospital, some neighbors, and the Thompson family, seated discreetly in the back row. The simplicity of the gathering struck Emily. This woman who had upended so many lives had, in the end, few people to mark her passing. The minister, who had never met Helen, spoke in generalities about life's journey and finding peace in death. The hollow platitudes echoed in the nearly empty chapel, failing to capture the complex reality of the woman they were there to remember. When the minister asked if anyone would like to say a few words, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The few attendees glanced at each other, then at Jessica, who sat in the front row, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. After a moment, Jessica rose shakily and made her way to the small podium. Emily could see the trembling in her shoulders, the way she gripped the edges of the wooden stand to steady herself. "Helen Miller was my mother," Jessica began, her voice soft but clear. "For 20 years, she was the person who bandaged my scraped knees, who stayed up with me when I had nightmares, who cheered the loudest at my school plays." She paused, taking a deep breath. "She read me bedtime stories every night until I was 12 and insisted I was too old. And then she kept doing it anyway, just calling it reading time instead." A few gentle laughs rippled through the small gathering. Jessica continued, describing the mother she had known. Kind, dedicated, always present for every important moment of her life. As she spoke, Emily could see the genuine love Jessica had for Helen, the real connection that had formed between them, despite its terrible foundation. Halfway through her eulogy, Jessica faltered, her voice breaking. "I recently learned that my mother made a terrible choice many years ago, a choice that caused immeasurable pain to others." Her eyes sought out the Thompson family in the back row, a choice that changed the course of many lives, including my own. The chapel fell completely silent. Even the minister seemed frozen, unsure how to respond to this unexpected turn. Jessica struggled to continue, her words coming in broken fragments. "I don't know how. I can't reconcile the mother I knew with—" To everyone's surprise, Emily rose from her seat and walked steadily to the front of the chapel. She climbed the steps to the podium and stood beside Jessica, not touching her but present, supportive. "I'm Emily Thompson," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "And I'm here today to recognize a complicated truth. The woman who caused my family the greatest pain imaginable also loved and raised my daughter when I couldn't." A collective gasp went through the small audience. Those who hadn't known the full story looked at each other in confusion, while Helen's colleagues from the hospital exchanged knowing glances. The story had spread quickly through hospital corridors after Helen's death. Emily continued, finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. 20 years ago, Helen Miller took my newborn daughter from the hospital. For 2 decades, we lived in a nightmare of not knowing. Was our child alive? Was she suffering? Would we ever see her again? She paused, looking directly at Jessica. What I didn't know during those years was that my daughter was being raised by a woman who, despite the terrible wrong she had committed, gave her a life filled with love and care. From the back row, Michael watched with wide eyes as his wife spoke words he never imagined hearing. Beside him, Amanda squeezed his hand, offering silent support. "Forgiveness doesn't come easily," Emily said, her voice catching slightly. "And I won't stand here and pretend that what Helen did can ever be fully forgiven. But I can acknowledge the humanity in all of us, the capacity for both terrible mistakes and genuine love." She turned to Jessica, finally allowing herself to place a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "And I can be grateful that when I couldn't be there to watch my daughter grow, someone was. Someone who, in her own way, preserved the beautiful young woman who has now returned to us." As Emily stepped back from the podium, Jessica embraced her, the two women holding each other in a moment that transcended the usual boundaries of grief and comfort. They were united, not just by blood, but by their connection to the complex woman they had come to mourn. After the service, the small gathering moved to the cemetery for the burial. The Thompsons stood slightly apart, giving Jessica space to say her final goodbyes. As the simple casket was lowered into the ground, Emily was struck by the strange symmetry. 15 years ago, they had buried an empty casket in Lily's name. Today, they were witnessing the burial of the woman who had made that earlier ceremony a lie. Later that afternoon, the Thompson family gathered in their home. Jessica had joined them, bringing with her a dusty box retrieved from Helen's apartment. They sat in the living room, the box placed on the coffee table between them like an uncertain offering. "It's the thing she saved from when I was little," Jessica explained, lifting the lid. "She kept everything. My first shoes, baby teeth, school reports." Emily reached into the box and carefully lifted out a small plaster cast of infant handprints. "Your hands were so tiny," she whispered, tracing the impressions with her fingertip. Michael, who had remained largely silent throughout the day, rose from his seat and disappeared upstairs. He returned moments later carrying a similar box, this one marked Lily in careful script. "We kept things too," he said, placing it beside Helen's box. "Things we never got to give you. Things we saved, hoping someday." He trailed off. emotion making further words impossible. Emily opened the box, showing Jessica the carefully preserved items inside: a hospital bracelet, a lock of hair from her first haircut, the outfit they had brought her home from the hospital in, never worn. "It's strange," Amanda observed quietly. "Both boxes tell the story of the same person, just from different perspectives." Jessica nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. Two lives that were supposed to be one. "Maybe they can be now," Emily suggested. "Not erasing either past, but bringing them together." As twilight fell, they moved to the backyard. Michael had built a small fire in the pit, and they gathered around it in the growing darkness. Emily brought out the box that had been buried at Lily's symbolic funeral 15 years ago, now unearthed for this new ritual. One by one, they added items to the box, not as a burial this time, but as a collection of memories being acknowledged and honored. Amanda placed a recent photograph of herself and Jessica, taken at the hospital days before Helen died. Michael hesitated before adding a small silver keychain, shaped like their home state. "So, you always know the way back home," he said gruffly, placing it in Jessica's palm before she added it to the box. As they completed their improvised ceremony, Jessica stood looking at the box with tears in her eyes, suddenly understanding that she didn't have to choose between being Jessica or Lily. She could incorporate both identities into who she was becoming. Later that night, when everyone else had gone to bed, Emily found Jessica in what had once been Lily's room, now prepared for her visits. She stood by the window, gazing out at the night sky, her expression distant and troubled. "I'm pregnant," Jessica whispered without turning around. "And I don't know how to tell him, or you." Emily stood frozen, the words hanging in the air between them. Pregnant. The revelation shifted the emotional landscape yet again, adding another layer to their already complex situation. "How long have you known?" she asked, moving to stand beside Jessica at the window. "About 6 weeks," Jessica replied, still gazing at the night sky. "I found out just days before Helen told me the truth about who I was." She turned to face Emily, her eyes searching. "I was going to tell her first. I had it all planned. A special dinner, a little gift box with a pacifier inside. And then everything changed." Emily's mind was racing, processing this new information. Her daughter, just returned to her after 20 years, was going to have a child of her own. She would be a grandmother. "The father?" Emily asked gently. "David," Jessica said, a small smile softening her features despite her obvious anxiety. "My boyfriend of 3 years. He's studying engineering, works part-time as a bartender to pay his way through school." Her hand moved unconsciously to rest on her still flat stomach. "He doesn't know yet. With everything that's happened, I haven't found the right moment." Emily placed a tentative hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Would you like me to come with you to your first appointment? When you're ready, of course." Jessica looked surprised, then grateful. "You wouldn't mind?" "Mind? Jessica, Lily." Emily stumbled over the names, still uncertain which to use. "You're my daughter, and this is my grandchild. Of course I want to be there." The next morning, Emily helped Jessica make an appointment with an obstetrician recommended by her family doctor. As they sat at the kitchen table with calendars and phones, working out dates, there was an unexpected normalcy to the moment. A mother and daughter planning together, the way they should have been doing for years. Michael's reaction to the news was more reserved. He stood by the kitchen counter, coffee mug gripped tightly in his hand, his expression guarded. "Pregnant," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "That's significant news." "I know it's a lot to process on top of everything else," Jessica said cautiously. "It wasn't planned, but—" "No, it's not that," Michael interrupted, setting down his mug. "It's just, we've missed so much already. Your childhood, your adolescence, your graduation. And now you're starting a family of your own." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Jessica was beginning to recognize as a sign of emotional struggle. It feels like we're still catching up, and life is already racing ahead. Jessica hadn't considered this perspective. In her worry about their reaction, she hadn't thought about how the pregnancy might highlight all they had lost, all the milestones they would never experience together. "I understand," she said quietly, "but maybe this can be something we share from the beginning, something we don't have to catch up on." Michael's expression softened slightly. "I'd like that." Amanda, on the other hand, was unexpectedly enthusiastic about the news. She bounded into the kitchen later that morning, having clearly been told by their parents. "I'm going to be an aunt," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around Jessica in an impulsive hug that caught them both by surprise. "This is amazing. Do you know if it's a boy or girl yet? Have you thought about names? Can I help plan the baby shower?" Jessica laughed, overwhelmed by Amanda's excitement. "Slow down. It's still very early. I don't even know how to tell David yet." Amanda's eyes widened. "He doesn't know? You have to tell him immediately. When can we meet him? Is he nice? Does he treat you well?" Her protective instinct flared up suddenly. "Because if he doesn't, He's wonderful," Jessica assured her, touched by her sister's instant loyalty. "He's been my rock through everything with Helen's illness, even before I knew the truth about who I was. I'm just worried about how to tell him about all of this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the entire situation and the pregnancy at the same time. "Invite him to dinner," Amanda suggested. "Here. We'll all be on our best behavior, I promise." Later that day, Jessica called David, her heart pounding as she heard his familiar voice. "Jess, I've been worried sick. Are you okay? Your texts have been so vague. He hesitated. "Did Helen pass?" "Yes," Jessica confirmed, her throat tightening. "The funeral was yesterday. But David, there's so much more I need to tell you, in person. Could you come to dinner tonight? There are some people I need you to meet." That evening, Jessica paced nervously in the Thompsons' living room, waiting for David's arrival. She had given him the address, but explained little else, wanting to tell him everything face to face. When the doorbell rang, she nearly jumped out of her skin. Emily gave her a reassuring nod as Jessica went to answer it. David stood on the porch, a bouquet of flowers in hand, his familiar face a beacon of normalcy in her upturned world. He was handsome in a comfortable way. Warm brown eyes, a slightly crooked smile, curly hair that never quite stayed in place. "Hey," he said softly, taking in her tense expression. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes at his steady presence. She led him into the living room where the Thompson family waited, all trying to appear casual and failing miserably. "David," Jessica began, taking a deep breath, "I'd like you to meet Emily and Michael Thompson, and their daughter Amanda." She paused, gathering courage. "My biological family." David looked between them in confusion. "Biological family. Jess, what's going on?" Over dinner, Jessica explained everything. Helen's deathbed confession, the DNA test, the revelations about her true identity. David listened intently, his expression shifting from shock to disbelief to concern. "So, you're telling me," he said slowly when she finished, "that Helen kidnapped you as a baby, that your real name is Lily Thompson?" "That's part of it." Jessica nodded, her hand finding his across the table. "But there's more." She took a deep breath, aware of the Thompson family watching them carefully. "I'm pregnant, David. We're going to have a baby." David's fork clattered to his plate. For a moment he sat in stunned silence, processing the dual revelations. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed, a sound of pure, overwhelmed joy. "A baby?" he repeated, his eyes shining. "We're having a baby?" He stood abruptly, pulling Jessica to her feet and wrapping her in a tight embrace, seemingly oblivious to their audience. "I love you so much," he whispered against her hair. "Both of you." When he finally released her, he turned to face the Thompsons, suddenly aware of the impropriety of his outburst. "I'm sorry, this is a lot to take in." Michael regarded him thoughtfully, then extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, David. It seems you've joined us at a rather complicated time." Later, while Jessica and David were talking privately in the garden, Emily found herself browsing baby furniture catalogs that Amanda had enthusiastically produced from somewhere. The normalcy of the activity was strangely soothing after the emotional turbulence of recent days. "I think Jessica is scared," Amanda observed, sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by glossy pages of cribs and changing tables. "Of course she is," Emily replied. "She's just lost the mother she knew, discovered her entire identity was built on a lie, and found out she's pregnant. Anyone would be terrified." "No, I mean specifically about being a mother," Amanda clarified. "I heard her talking to David earlier. She's afraid she'll make the same kinds of mistakes Helen did." Emily put down the catalog she was holding, struck by the insight. Of course, Jessica would worry about that. How could she not? Her only model for motherhood had been a woman who, for all her apparent love and care, had committed an unforgivable act. She found Jessica in the kitchen later, making tea while David spoke with Michael in the living room, the two men cautiously finding common ground in a discussion about baseball. "Amanda thinks you're worried about being a mother," Emily said directly, handing Jessica a clean mug for her tea. "Because of Helen." Jessica's hand stilled briefly. "What if there's something wrong with me? What if I don't know how to do this right? Helen loved me, I know she did, but look at what she was capable of." She looked up at Emily, vulnerability naked in her eyes. "What if I have that in me too?" Emily reached for Jessica's hands, holding them firmly in her own. "Listen to me. Every parent worries about making mistakes. Every single one. But there's a world of difference between normal parental errors and what Helen did." "But how can I know?" Jessica pressed. She seemed so normal, so loving, and yet she was capable of taking someone else's child. "The difference," Emily said gently, "is that she put her own needs above yours, above everyone's. Being a good parent means always putting your child first, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." She squeezed Jessica's hands. "From what I've seen of you these past days, how you've handled impossible situations with grace and compassion, I have no doubt you'll be a wonderful mother." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I wish I had your confidence." As the days passed, preparations began for both Jessica's new role in the Thompson family and the baby's arrival. Emily and Jessica began organizing a nursery, deliberately choosing a different room than the one that had been prepared for Lily 2 decades ago, a new space for a new beginning. One afternoon, as they assembled a crib David had selected, Jessica paused, a screwdriver in hand. "I've been thinking about names," she said hesitantly. "If it's a girl, I'd like to use Helen as a middle name." Emily looked up in surprise. "I know it's complicated," Jessica continued quickly, "and if it makes you uncomfortable, I completely understand. But, despite everything, she was my mother, for better or worse." Emily was quiet for a moment, turning the request over in her mind. It would be easy to object, to see it as an homage to a woman who had caused them such pain. But she understood what Jessica was trying to do, honor all parts of her history, not just the newly discovered ones. "I think," Emily said carefully, "that would be a fitting tribute to the complicated legacy your child will inherit. A reminder that even the most broken stories can find healing." On the eve of a small celebration to officially welcome Jessica into the Thompson family and announce the pregnancy to close friends, the family lawyer called with disturbing news. Sarah had made a deal with the prosecution and implicated more people in Lily's kidnapping, including Michael's own father, who had passed away 10 years ago. Michael's hand trembled as he set down the phone. The evening had been meticulously planned, a small gathering to formally welcome Jessica into the family and announce her pregnancy to their closest friends. The dining room table was already set with Emily's best china, fresh flowers arranged as a centerpiece. Now this news threatened to shatter the fragile peace they had been building. "What is it?" Emily asked, immediately sensing his distress. "That was Lawrence," Michael said, referring to their longtime family lawyer. "Sarah made a deal with the prosecution. She's implicated others in Lily's kidnapping." He paused, struggling to form the words. "Including my father." Emily sank into the nearest chair. "Your father? But he's been dead for 10 years. "Convenient timing for Sarah," Michael replied bitterly. "She claims he was more involved than we thought, that he didn't just introduce Helen to our family by coincidence, that he actively helped with planning the abduction." "That can't be true," Emily whispered, though uncertainty crept into her voice. The photograph they had found of Robert Thompson with Helen suddenly took on new significance. Jessica and Amanda entered the kitchen, caught the tension immediately, and froze in the doorway. "What's happened?" Jessica asked. Michael looked at his daughter. The word still felt strange in his mind when attached to this young woman, and couldn't bring himself to add another burden to her shoulders. But she deserved the truth, all of it, no matter how painful. "Sarah is saying my father was involved in your kidnapping," he said flatly. "That it wasn't just an unfortunate introduction, but that he actively participated in the planning." Jessica's face paled. "Your father? But why would he?" "I don't know," Michael admitted. "It makes no sense. He was devastated when you disappeared. He spent thousands of dollars hiring private investigators. When the police investigation stalled, he grieved with us." "Unless that was part of his cover," Amanda suggested quietly. "To appear as invested as possible so no one would suspect him." Michael shook his head vehemently. "No, I refuse to believe that. Sarah is trying to spread the blame, to lessen her own culpability by dragging a dead man's name through the mud." The safety deposit box, Jessica suddenly remembered. There might be evidence there. Helen documented everything. Within the hour, they were at First National Bank, Jessica presenting Helen's key and the death certificate required to access the box. The bank manager led them to a private room where the metal container was brought out and placed before them. Inside, they found more photographs, letters, and a third journal, this one bound in black leather, older than the others they had seen. Jessica opened it carefully, the spine crackling with age. "It starts before I was born," she said, scanning the first few pages. She was documenting her friendship with Sarah from the beginning. Emily leaned closer as Jessica turned pages, stopping at an entry from approximately a month before Lily's birth. "Robert brought photos today from the baby shower," Jessica read aloud. "The nursery is painted yellow with butterfly stencils. Sarah says the Thompsons have no idea that their perfect family picture is about to be altered forever. I should feel guilty for what we're planning, but when Robert talks about how I deserve this chance at motherhood, I can almost believe it's justified." Michael snatched the journal from Jessica's hands, reading the passage himself, his face draining of color. "This can't be real," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "My father would never—" Another document caught Emily's attention, a faded letter in handwriting she recognized immediately as Robert Thompson's. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Helen," she read, "I've secured the hospital access you requested. The security guard on duty that night is a former client who owes me a significant favor. He'll look the other way during the shift change, giving you the window we discussed. Sarah has confirmed that Emily will be heavily sedated after the difficult delivery. No one will be expecting anything. Maternity ward abductions are vanishingly rare in facilities of this caliber. I've made the final payment to the night nurse, who will disable the security cameras. I believe we've covered every contingency. Once it's done, I'll need to maintain distance for obvious reasons. Sarah will be our only point of contact. Remember your promise, a clean break, a new start in another state. The child will have opportunities I could never provide through legitimate means, and you'll have the daughter you've always deserved. The letter dropped from Emily's shaking hands. The conspiracy had been more extensive than any of them had imagined, reaching into the very heart of their family. Why? Michael's voice broke on the single word. Why would he do this to us? Jessica continued to sort through the documents, her expression growing increasingly troubled. There's more, she said softly, holding up another letter. This one is from your father to Helen, dated about a year before my kidnapping. Michael took it reluctantly. Helen, he read. The situation with Michael and Emily grows more concerning. Their marriage is failing under the strain of multiple miscarriages. I fear my son will lose everything he's built. His marriage, his partnership at the firm, his standing in the community. Another pregnancy might temporarily bandage their relationship, but the doctors have made it clear that Emily's chances of carrying to term are minimal. The psychological toll of another loss could destroy them both. Your suggestion intrigues me. A child appearing when they most need hope could indeed save their marriage. Your nursing background and experience with infants makes you an ideal candidate to raise the child initially. 5 years would give Michael and Emily time to stabilize, to grow stronger as a couple, to build the financial security they currently lack. When the child is returned to them, they will be better equipped to provide the stable home every child deserves. He was trying to protect us, Emily whispered, the horrifying logic becoming clear. In his twisted way, he thought he was saving our marriage, saving Michael's future. By stealing our child? Michael's voice rose in disbelief. How could that possibly help us? He never intended it to be permanent, Jessica realized, finding another letter. This is dated when I would have been about 5 years old. Your father was insisting it was time for Helen to return me to you, but she refused. The letter confirmed Jessica's assessment. Robert Thompson had been writing increasingly desperate demands that Helen honor their original agreement. The final letter, dated shortly before his death, was a barely veiled threat to expose everything if Helen didn't return Lily to her rightful family. He died thinking he was protecting this secret, Michael said numbly. All those years, he carried this burden, believing he was somehow acting in our best interests. It's no excuse, Emily said firmly. What he did, what all of them did, was monstrous, regardless of their intentions. Jessica sat silently, absorbing the revelations about her abduction. This hadn't been the impulsive act of a grief-stricken woman, as she had believed, but a calculated conspiracy involving multiple people, including the grandfather she had never known. What do we do with this information? Amanda asked finally. Do we make it public? Do we protect grandfather's reputation? Michael ran a hand over his face. I don't know. His reputation, our family name, none of that seems important compared to the truth. He participated in kidnapping his own granddaughter. There's no spinning that. But he's not here to defend himself, Amanda pointed out, or to face consequences. Unlike Sarah, Emily added grimly. Jessica closed the journal carefully. I think we need to give this evidence to Detective Ramirez, she said quietly. Whatever we decide to do publicly, the police should know the full extent of what happened. Michael nodded, his shoulders slumped with the weight of betrayal. His father, the man he had admired, emulated, grieved, had orchestrated the greatest tragedy of their lives, all while pretending to share their suffering. They returned home in somber silence, the evening's planned celebration forgotten. As they entered the house, the phone rang. It was David, calling to confirm the time for the gathering. I should tell him we're canceling, Jessica said, reaching for the phone. Emily stopped her. No. We've had enough of our lives derailed by these revelations. Tonight is about welcoming you home, about celebrating new life. We won't let the past steal that from us, too. Are you sure? Michael asked, surprised by Emily's resolve. I'm sure, she said firmly. 20 years ago, Robert and Helen and Sarah made decisions that shattered our family. Tonight, we make our own decision, to move forward together, with the truth as our foundation, not our prison. The gathering that evening was small and subdued, but genuine. David arrived early to help Jessica prepare, sensing her emotional exhaustion without needing to be told the details. Their closest friends, those who had supported the Thompsons through 20 years of grief, surrounded them with love and cautious joy as they announced Jessica's return and her pregnancy. Later, as the guests departed, Michael found himself alone on the porch with David. The younger man had proven himself steady throughout the evening, his quiet support of Jessica unfaltering despite the maelstrom he had been drawn into. You're handling all this remarkably well, Michael observed. David smiled faintly. I love her. The rest is just context we need to work through. Context, Michael repeated, appreciating the simple wisdom of the word. That's one way to look at it. Sir, I want you to know that I'll take care of them, Jessica and the baby. No matter what comes next with all these revelations, she won't face it alone. Michael studied the young man before him, recognizing sincerity when he saw it. I believe you will, he said, offering his hand. And neither will you. That's what family does. Inside, Jessica sat between Emily and Amanda on the sofa, looking at ultrasound images from her first prenatal appointment that morning. 8 weeks, she said, pointing to the tiny smudge that would become their family's newest member. The doctor says everything looks perfect. Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. Tears of joy, of grief for all they had missed, of hope for what lay ahead. The journey had been unimaginable, the pain unfathomable, but here, in this quiet moment of shared anticipation, she felt the first real healing begin. The future stretched before them, not unmarked by the past, but no longer defined by it either. There would be more revelations, more difficult truths to face, more moments of reckoning. But there would also be first steps and birthdays, graduations and weddings, the ordinary miracles of family life that had been stolen from them once, but never would be again. 6 months later, as her belly rounded with new life, Jessica found a small package on her doorstep. Inside was a handcrafted mobile of butterflies and a note from Emily. For your little one, a reminder that even from the darkest cocoons, something beautiful can emerge.